endangered species, but we try and fly the flag, as it were. So yeah, you're with a good cause, as it were. So just to begin, I think if we look at your recent work, which obviously those on your Facebook page and those who've seen what you're up to at the moment more widely would have noticed, which is your work in the English Channel with regards to the migrant boats coming over from France, in many cases guided by the French Navy. So just as a broad overview, I think people are quite keen to know, firstly, what's going on in the English Channel, why aren't we hearing about it, and what needs to be done by our government?
Well, once lockdown started and I realized I was going to be at home a lot, I thought, well, I'm going to start doing my own broadcasts. And I started doing, Facebook Lives and monologues and answering questions and things like that. And something was on my radar about what was going on in the English Channel. Of course, it started really in 2015, but I began to get reports from people in Kent and East Sussex, not just about Border Force picking up people, but about beach landings, about migrant boats arriving under cover of darkness, people disappearing, in many cases the dinghies being towed away. And I thought to myself, okay, I get it. We're in this huge health and economic crisis, but why is there literally no coverage of this on mainstream media whatsoever? So I went down one day to East Sussex, to a place called Pett Level next to Hastings, a little homemade film of me on the beach, of me talking to fishermen, and suddenly a couple of million people viewed it. I thought, wow, there's a real public interest here, and our journalists aren't doing their job. So since then, I've spent several days out in the English Channel, and what I've been able to prove conclusively, and I'm not even being called a liar on this, which is most unusual. And what I've been able to prove is that despite the 61 million quid we've given to the French to stop this trade from happening, French naval boats are literally escorting inflatable dinghies from French waters into British waters, at which point they are, and it's called the handover. And the Border Force then accept them. They come into the United Kingdom, they put in an asylum claim, they're then sent off to various four-star hotels all over the country at the expense of a taxpayer. Historically, about 5% of those who come in via this route get returned. At the moment, nobody is being returned anywhere. And the pace of this, we're now looking at approaching 1,300 people that have come in since lockdown. So I'm doing my best to put pressure on Priti Patel to say, look, once we finally left the EU rule book, we have to say that nobody that comes via this route will be allowed to stay.
And I think that's the big question, really, which is on everyone's minds, which is why is nothing being done about it? Because we have Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, was billed when she first came into power as being tough on crime, tough on borders, and everything else. And I mean, so the question really is it incompetence, government incompetence, something which I know you spoke about last night, or is there something going on that we don't know about in terms of
well, look, I mean, so your party, which is called the Conservative Party, is led by a man called Boris Johnson.
Allegedly.
Well, quite, who, when it comes to this issue of illegal immigration, has the most astonishingly bad track record. He has twice, when he was Mayor of London, called for complete amnesties for those that have come illegally. So however much Priti wants to do, she may find it very difficult with Boris as leader. Also, collectively, our political and media class think it would be awful to send people back to countries that are poorer than we are. But the truth of it is, if you worked on that basis, billions might want to come to the United Kingdom. And we have no idea who's coming. William, I have met face to face some of these people in these dinghies, and I have no doubt that some of them are fleeing appalling oppressive regimes in Iran.
Of course.
Others may well be Christians coming from Iraq and other countries where their lives have become, frankly, impossible over the last few years. But be in no doubt that 90% of those that are coming are young men between the ages of 18 and 26 who were coming from Eritrea, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, you name it. None of them would ever qualify as refugees under any Geneva Convention definition.
No.
They are coming as economic migrants. And my fear is, unless we grip this very quickly, this summer could see literally an invasion. And that brings with it, I saw one or two of these young people in that boat, very aggressive towards us. And I thought,
yeah.
I wonder, I bet one or two of you were fighting for ISIS a few months ago before they were militarily defeated. Now, whether I'm right or wrong, the point is there are serious security implications here too.
Of course, it's the unacceptable risk fundamentally, and I think one of the most scandalous parts of it, because these are truths which we've known about for years with regards to illegal migration. But one of the most scandalous bits is the complicity of the French Navy, and I suppose what I'd like to ask on those grounds is this a warning sign, as it were, or a red flag as to our future relationship with Europe? Because if we look at the complicity of the French Navy and therefore the French government in this migrant crisis, along the backdrop of the EU's recent negotiation strategy, which has been, particularly with regards to fisheries, one which is completely unreasonable. How does this bode for the next decade, should we say?
Actually, I'm going to take a contrary view to that, because take this crisis first, and then we'll talk about the broader issue of our relations with European countries. One of the reasons the French are happy to effectively turn a blind eye in some cases when it comes to beach launchings, but to physically escort in others, is they've got these camps at Calais. All the problems that come with those camps, they're almost happy to be rid of the problem. But find the right solution. Make it clear that the UK will not accept anybody under any circumstances into the country that comes illegally across the English Channel. And you know what? Not only does our problem stop, but the French problem stops too, because Calais stops to become a magnet.
Of course,
for those that want to get there. So
and with that, people
actually, there is a solution here. Stops. And more broadly, once we are fully free, let's hope we're fully free and independent of the single market, the customs union, the European arrest warrant, the common fisheries policy, the list goes on as long as your arm. Actually, we will then be a different country, and I suspect our relations with France and Germany and elsewhere will actually be rather better, because they will have a quiet respect for us for the fact that we've actually broken free and we're doing our own thing.
And in terms of wider relations, obviously a topic you know a lot about and is in the headlines for a number of reasons at the moment is the Trump administration in the States. And I saw your post yesterday, I think, indeed before Trump announced it. So perhaps your secretly guiding policy, which is allegedly, which is Antifa being declared a terrorist organization, which I think has come at long last. And just speaking more generally, how do you think Trump is managing the crisis, both in terms of the protests at the moment and coronavirus more widely?
Well, nobody in British politics was targeted more by these people than me. It went on for years. It was relentless. It was violent. It was unpleasant. All right, I know some of that comes with public life, but the extent of it was quite extraordinary. I said in 2017 on Twitter that I thought Antifa should be designated as a terrorist organization. I'm very pleased the president has said what he said. And Black Lives Matter. I just heard Matt Hancock in the House of Commons saying Black Lives Matter, coming out with this usual politically correct spouting that he does. Well, Black Lives Matter sounds great. All these organizations, hope not hate, they all sound wonderful until you examine what the modus operandi of some of them is. When you examine the connection with Soros and many other people. And look, I think the murder, as it may be, we're prejudging. We are prejudging this case. But if we are to assume that it is third-degree murder that was committed by that policeman, that obviously is awful. And we've seen other cases of it in America. And there is a huge black-white divide in many American cities. It's a problem that has not got better. But the idea that somehow that can be used for mass civil unrest, violence, looting is wrong. And the idea that somehow it's President Trump's fault, well, what did Obama do in his 8 years to improve the lives of black people in America? Absolutely nothing. And I know that mainstream media are looking for Trump to come up with a conciliatory approach. But how can you conciliate with people that are setting fire to churches, smashing up shopping precincts? You have to establish the rule of law. And I thought, and many don't like the Donald style. It's individualistic. It's not what we expect from American presidents or politicians. But I thought, and don't forget, his position is tough here. He hasn't really got much power unless he calls him a national army. It's really in the hands of mayors. It's in the hands
state governors, exactly.
State governors. But I think his message that before we can start healing anything, we have to stop mass civil disorder. I think it was the right message. And I'm very amused this morning to read the commentariat saying, oh, Trump has poured petrol on the flames and all the rest of it. Yeah. I bet you middle America are saying, thank goodness, because we've got to get
exactly
some order back.
And that's, I suppose, the real consideration here, at least from Trump's perspective in political terms, which is how is this going to vote in the next 6 months in electoral terms? And given your experience back in 2016 and subsequently with the concerns of American voters you've come across, do you think that this will, if it is quelled, if it is suppressed, if order is restored, whilst taking into account the sensitivity of the situation, do you think we are looking at a Trump re-election in October?
Look, remember that Brexit was never going to happen. Remember that Trump was never going to happen. I spoke at a spectator dinner a week before the Trump election in 2016. And I said that next Wednesday, I was on the first flight out to DC to congratulate President Trump. Oh, they roared with laughter. Theresa May, the great and the good. Oh, isn't it so funny? Isn't this Farage bloke so completely mad? We know so much better in SW1 what's happening in the world. And they're doing the same again. Look, Trump's big card was always the economy, all right?
Yeah.
And I think even his critics would say he'd done a pretty damn good job with the economy. They lightened restrictions. They got some manufacturing jobs back into America. Things were going very, very well. With coronavirus and now with this level of civil unrest, he's clearly got a tough uphill battle. But remember this, he's up against the Democrat Party, who rather like the Labour Party for the last few years, don't really know who they are or what they stand for. And he's up against Sleepy Joe, who must rate as the worst presidential candidate that has ever been put up in the history of the USA. I mean, the guy cannot string a sentence together. Now, remember, and it goes back to the early 60s, the 3 head-to-head debates in America that take place between the 2 challengers, those 3 debates decide more voting minds than any other single thing. And I will bet you, William, every penny in Lombard Street against an orange, that Trump destroys Biden in those debates. So look, last time I saw the president, it was in February, early February of this year, before this all happened, and he was riding high, full of confidence. In fact, many thought, he might win 35 or 40 states.
Yes.
Come the election this November. That clearly now isn't the case. But all I would say to those who don't like his style and who want to see him lose and are busy writing him off is never underestimate this man.
No, exactly. I mean, as we saw in 2016, indeed, both here and I suppose the not start of campaigning, but the sort of campaign that you led equally over here, which was that of the underdog fundamentally, which is important to consider. And so just from that perspective, you've talked about the economy, you've talked about all that Trump's achieved, and particularly with regards to African Americans, for example, in America and improving their lot more than Obama did. When you, back in 2016, when you first made that speech in Mississippi, when you sort of first formally tied yourself to the Trump campaign, in political policy terms, have the previous 4 years panned out as you thought they would? in terms of Trump, as in has he? Because there's been some criticism to say that, you know, with the expulsion of Bannon, with people like Jared Kushner taking the reins in the White House, Trump's foreign policy, for example, he's not really stuck to his guns. I mean, the economy obviously is a different case. But
if I'd said to you, all right, 4 years ago, when everyone was saying that Trump will be a warmonger, it'll be World War III, no. Unlike the neocons, who had dominated everything from the Bush era all the way through Obama, Trump is not for foreign military intervention. We've seen a couple of limited strikes that have taken place. But if I'd said to you 4 years ago, Donald Trump would cross the border from South Korea to North Korea to meet Kim, you would have thought I was off my rocker. And I think America standing in the world is a lot greater now than it was before he took office. Has everything panned out the way I thought? Look, you could never, ever tell, can you, what is going to happen? What I do know is this. Even if people think that Trump's a bit rough and ready, even if his direct style is not their cup of tea, I know the guy. I know he's got some good, strong, fundamental principles. In fact, very conservative principles in many ways about country, about family, about many of these things. He believes in it passionately. He's got guts and he's got courage. And I'll say this to you. If he is not re-elected, we will live in a few years' time in a world completely controlled by China. And the only man who can rally the West to start to stand up and to understand the threat we face is Donald Trump. And this is just as when I was your age, we were in the midst of a Cold War against the Soviet Union. We are now going into a Cold War with China. The stakes are incredibly high, as we can see in Hong Kong now and elsewhere.
Absolutely.
So I think in terms of Western world leadership and dealing with this huge battle, this huge threat that we face to our entire way of life, I think he's key.
And this is another thing I'd be keen to get your view on, just in a sort of particularly British context, you know, because obviously, as you say, spot on, Trump is doing a lot about China, he's speaking a lot about China, and he is taking them by the horns, as it were. But what do you think Britain's role from here on in is, particularly with regards to the issue of Hong Kong, but also due to the fact that in raw logistical terms, we've got a trade deficit with them, you know, hugely influential economically. Where do we go from here, really?
We have a moral and legal responsibility to take the lead over what has happened in Hong Kong over the course of the last week. Indeed, you could argue what's happened over the course of the last year, 18 months. And where is Boris Johnson? Where is he?
Yeah.
Where is he? I mean, I know it's sunny outside and lovely, and he's got a new baby and all, but where is he? You know, we signed joint statements with the Canadians, the Australians. Where is the moral authority? Where is the leadership on this?
And do you think that
I've not heard a dicky bird out of him on this. We leave it to Trump to effectively make the running for the West. And more broadly, look, David Cameron and George Osborne, many of our civil servants, once they retire, many of our big business people, indeed, many people who wanted to sell us out to Brussels are now happy to sell us out to China. And the problem is that all the influences, all the close influences on Boris are pro-Chinese. I think he's in for a awakening. He has got a battle now within the Conservative Party over those who become China skeptics, every bit as great as David Cameron had with the Eurosceptics back a decade or so ago. And I think this is one that the China skeptics will win and that Boris will lose. And I think and I hope it'll happen sooner rather than later.
Because that was, well, both to me and I know many others who are watching the issue, the primary concern, which is that it seems there's a very insidious and quiet lobby in Westminster and elsewhere, which is either paid for by Huawei, the Chinese government, or so forth, and is pushing CCP ideals. And in Cambridge in particular, you know, we see this even with our Vice Chancellor, there are concerns with regard to Chinese money, Chinese influence, and so forth. And so I guess the question is, you know, from, you know, as an experienced political campaigner who's taken on Europe, Eurofiles and so forth, how do you think the struggle against China will be conducted, and what needs to be done in the immediate
What
sense?
pleased me, as I say, the early battle lines of this at the start of this year, it looked like a rerun. Eurosceptics, China skeptics, Europhiles, pro the Sino-British relationship. But there's been a change, a decisive change. Sir Malcolm Rifkind, former Foreign Secretary, leading a group of 7 former Foreign Secretaries demanding that we take a lead. And Malcolm, a Remainer, very strong on this. Chris Patton, who was spoken out on this wonderfully. So I now think actually there is a coming together of both. Almost bipartisanship is breaking out in the Conservative Party on this issue, and that's a very good and a very healthy thing. It also shows that some of those Brexit divisions have now been left behind, and people can now start to work together on other issues, and that's a really good and a really important thing. But yes, I mean, look, the Chinese have bought and paid for a substantial chunk of the British, upper ruling classes. I listened this morning. I listened this morning to the Today program. Goodness knows why I do this to myself, but I did. And there I heard, arguing for Huawei, the man who was Neil Kinnock's right-hand man in the European Commission. These are the kind of people. And I'm afraid your university is pretty much as bad as it gets when it comes to this. I mean, God, if you have to sell your soul for money and new buildings, there's something wrong with your principles, in my opinion.
And I completely agree. And I think that one thing we are at the same time blessed with in Cambridge is there's a very strong Hong Kong and indeed overseas Chinese voice, which actually is taking this fight directly to university, directly to the faculties and the Chancellor, which is very, very important. But I think in terms of the whole sort of university discussion with China, it does hint at a wider issue, which is this idea, and maybe it will differ when China becomes the principal enemy, but I think we've seen in the past few years that actually the enemy to Britain's success and future is very much one which is now within. If you look at the universities, if you look at the civil service, there is sort of an embedded, I don't want to say anti-patriotic, but
you're getting into dangerous territory here, because back in 2014, I talked about the 5th column that existed within our country. Oh my goodness me. If you'd seen the press abuse I got for it.
Yeah. But of course,
yes, I have to say, I've thought this for years. There seemed to be a certain class of people, and they can be in the Foreign Office and elsewhere, who basically hate our country, are embarrassed by our history and everything we stand for, and we're very happy to see us packaged up in a modern globalist world as just a tiny little cog of a much bigger machine. Mercifully, I think here and across the West, common sense is prevailing. And we're saying to ourselves, do you know what? Actually, democracy on a nation state level doesn't mean we're against anybody. We want to trade with our neighbors, cooperate with our neighbors, be friends with our neighbors. We just don't want democracy to be replaced with global bureaucracy. And I think we're very much now on the winning side of that argument.
It is, as you say, common sense politics. And I remember on the evening of the Brexit referendum, it was a victory for common people, for ordinary people, which I suppose is where this sort of movement starts. It's common sense politics. And on which note, just as I'm aware time is ticking on, I suppose I'd ask you, given your career in Europe, your career in Britain campaigning UKIP, Brexit Party, and obviously independently, what's next for Nigel Farage really is, and where do you see yourself in the next year?
Well, look, there are areas like China, and even if it costs us more to have our antibiotics made here rather than 80% of them being made in China, these are choices I believe that we have to take for strategic reasons. There are areas like China, there are areas like illegal immigration, there are many areas on which I'm going to go on campaigning. The real issue is whether I do that through social media, through broadcasting, through writing, through speaking, or whether I do it once again through a political party taking votes off the mainstream to the extent that they have to change course and direction. The key to it all is what happens between now and the 1st of July. This government got elected on those ex-Labour votes, the red wall, yeah?
Yeah.
Almost every one of those voters had first voted for me. Almost every one of them had voted UKIP at some point or Brexit Party. They'd made the break with Labour. They went to Boris Johnson because Boris promised he would get Brexit done. If we finish up on July the 1st with transition extended, still part of the single market, still part of the customs union, still part of the common agricultural policy, the fisheries policy, the European arrest warrant, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And we effectively have taxation without representation, then I make you this promise. I will come back and be an even bigger thorn in the side of Boris Johnson than I ever was in that of David Cameron or Mrs. May. So you can take this as a threat, you can take it as a promise. I don't mind. The Prime Minister must deliver on the promises that he made the British electorate. That was the pact. That was what it was all about. And so really, politically, what I do from here will depend very much on that decision. More broadly than that, to answer your questions, in whatever guise it is, I will go on campaigning and fighting the British establishment when they do their best to hide the truth from us, and I shall probably go on doing that until the day I die.
Wonderful. No, well, that's absolutely fantastic. And I mean, I hope I don't get to see it, but I do look forward to it if it is necessary. I suppose is the best way of phrasing it, because obviously in terms of third party politics, I suppose what we're really talking about, the options are looking increasingly bleak for the dissenting voter. So yeah. I suppose we'll have to see where we go from here.
I mean, look, the Conservative Party find themselves with a big majority in a fantastic position. I know this crisis came out of left field. I know they haven't handled it very well, but they've still got a chance. They've still got a real chance to reshape the country. And they've got to get back on track with that as soon as they can.
We will make America great again.